right? This is my schedule. It now says we're live. As you know, this is number 40, I think, maybe 44. I did one today also. I don't believe it. Never believe technology. That's part of the whole thing we're living in now, right? And I see Pizzona's here, and that still doesn't convince me because that could be part of it. And Janana's here, still don't believe it. So what I do is I go over to my profile, right? I've got a ritual now. I've got a ritual for when these begin. I've got a ritual for after it ends. I have a pack of M&Ms. So now I go to my profile. I refresh because it hasn't showed up there. Now,
mine shut up. Shut up on mine.
Okay, so now what I do is I see us there, but now watch. There's a catch. We're also these days doing it on YouTube. Did you know that?
I knew it because you told me this afternoon. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that. And now everyone else knows that.
It's cool, right? I like YouTube, but it's not as interactive. YouTube is a destination. I like Periscope because it's a feed. The way you encounter it is just much different. Mm-hmm. So now I see okay, that's it. Now I go back. I see you. We're live. We did it. Now I turn down my music. You see, I've got it down to a ritual. I've got it down to a science. We're live on Twitter, live on Periscope, live on Twitter, live on YouTube. People are joining us, and I can vouch for myself, and I can vouch for you, Ron.
Yes, I am live on Twitter, on Periscope, on YouTube, and in the hearts of my countrymen.
Yeah, in the hearts of half of your countrymen.
No, everyone likes Ron Coleman.
You know what? Everybody does. Everybody genuinely does. I think that, and Rising Serpent is here. Namaste.
Cool.
Rising Serpent heard the Hanuman Chalisa. So Nancy and I, we speak Hindi, and this is the Hanuman Chalisa, which is a devotional song. It's a poem. It's a beautiful poem. So we're live. We did it. I think that everybody likes me too. Do you know that? I'm very fortunate. I have that face. I really do. And you have that same face. You have the face. You have a likable face.
I've made my entire living based on my looks. And
yeah. And so you're right.
It explains a lot.
Yeah. What I'm going to ask you to do is, would you be kind enough? This is Periscope number 2. We've done 2 of these now. This is a follow-up. So, and would you be kind enough to spend a little bit of time introducing yourself? Would that be all right?
Yes. I'm Ron Coleman. I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer who's very involved in social media. I'm a lawyer who's very involved professionally in social media with respect to issues concerning the use of intellectual property in social media and on the internet, free speech on the internet, in social media and elsewhere, and the issue of deplatforming and censorship as it relates to social media and other formats or other platforms and places as well. I'm a commercial litigator and a partner in the Dillon Law Group, which has its main office in San Francisco, California. I'm sitting here, however, in beautiful Montclair, New Jersey, where our New York, New Jersey office, consisting of me right now, is located. And I do things here. I do things in San Francisco. I do things in New York, all from the comfort of my desk due to the magic of the internet. And I've worked in more law firms than any human being in history. And I'm quite confident that no one can beat my record. But everyone still likes me.
Yeah, this is true. And when we last left off, it was September. And I was actually looking through it today because in advance of this, I put up a little clip. And it was that moment where Cassandra Fairbanks and Mark Dice had been kicked off of Twitter, or at least frozen. I'm not sure the terminology that they use, the vernacular within.
Suspended, I think. Suspended.
Is that what it was? Yeah, suspended for saying something.
Or
I don't know.
maybe locked out. Yeah, and I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if it was in defense of that kid who was accused of being.
Kyle Rittenhouse, was it?
Yeah. They were locked out, and it was kind of a shocking moment because you could see that that's when social media was really turning up the heat. You could see that trend, and we were discussing it then. You could see the trend that they were no longer allowing anything beyond the message that they wanted to go out.
Yeah, that was the beginning of, I think, a new gear. It kicked into a new gear, which we all had been predicting was going to happen before the election. That's about when you would expect it to happen, after the two conventions were over, and everyone knew exactly what the election was going to be. And things have really accelerated considerably since then. Social medias, particularly Twitter.
Yeah. Did you expect, when you say, as expected, did you actually expect this, this ferocity of it?
Yeah. I thought it might even be worse, actually.
And what would worse have looked like?
Well, Ron Coleman would be off. That would be worse.
That would be bad. Well, that would be bad personally. But it also depends on what Ron Coleman would have said to have gotten kicked off. Well, I mean, had you said something inflammatory, then it certainly wouldn't have been unexpected had you decided to kind of really push the envelope.
But inflammatory is a meaningless term, just like hate speech, just like, fake news, misinformation. They kicked people off for claiming things about COVID treatment, which turned out to be entirely true. They kicked off Trump just for being Trump. They kicked off Gavin McInnes because of the Proud Boys, which he wasn't even involved with at the time that he was kicked off. They don't give reasons, and if they do give reasons, they are fake reasons. And maybe they'll decide that my saying this tonight will be the reason to kick me off. What they're doing right now, though, by the way, and I've been fetching about this, everyone who follows me knows about it. They're still banning people. There are people we recognize and who we know who are gone now, who were not gone a week or two ago. What they're doing, for me, it's only been really noticeable since January. But someone else who I don't think necessarily wants me to talk about him, because we've been DMing about it, tells me that he's been getting it ready for a while, which is Twitter caps you. And I'm not aware that they're doing this to anyone on the left. And they're not doing it to all conservatives. And we're trying to figure out which conservatives are being targeted and why. I will get 30, 40, 50 notices of new follows every day. But when I wake up in the morning, or in fact, when I go to sleep at night, the number of followers is always the same. And it is always possible that people are going to unfollow me because I'm not perfect. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. But the idea that the same number of people would follow me as unfollow me within a band of, such a narrow band for weeks on end is, of course, just statistically impossible. And they don't deny it. They don't, there's no accountability. Twitter doesn't apologize, doesn't explain. And this, by the way, is a consumer ethos that we usually associate with monopolies. The phone company, when it was a monopoly, was notorious for its poor public customer service. Memorialized, is that the word that I mean? By the great Ernestine, the operator, the telephone operator. And it was all just go F yourself, We're the phone company. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Microsoft brought that into private commerce because they essentially were monopolists also. And now, so it's universal in social media. Because we're not really customers, right? We're the product. We're not the users. But be that as it may, they don't explain, they don't justify. No one's making them. And it's a pretty good racket. It's really, things have really, so yeah, I thought it could be worse. And I don't just mean because Ron Coleman and I would be off. I thought it could be worse because I thought myself and a lot of people like me who are critical of the empire would be off. That has not necessarily happened. And I think I go back to the discussion. I frequently quote you, both in private conversations that we had, and I think that we reiterated it in our last go round, where you said, Ron, we're safe because we color within the lines. We know not to step on that third rail. Now, sometimes you want to respond to that by saying, well, no, but there are people who don't appear to have done anything wrong and they were banned. But you often learn later on that some of the people you think never did or said anything wrong were actually playing games behind the scenes with, forbidden methods of amplification. Gaming the system, doing lots of sending DMs, links to lots and lots of people. That they only use that as a general rule for a pretext if there's someone they want to get rid of. But be that as it may, they have. My point is, you don't really know. You don't really know when someone disappeared. You don't really know why.
Yeah, I've got so much to say about that. I really do. And let me go back that, I get all your notifications, right? And I see that you have 127,000 followers. And then I guess for the last few weeks, you've been saying that it hasn't budged at all. And I use apps that are strict. They don't have a lot of tracking. They're modded out for me. So they don't have IP tracking. They don't have a lot of things, and they pull information in a different way. So I don't really get to see followers or even who I follow that much, only if I get notifications from them for the most part. But I looked into you. I've been watching you, and you're right.
Felt seen.
You know what? You're right. It's amazing that and there's not a lot of volatility to it. It's like you get 13 rise and then a 13 fall and then 20 rise, and they're very small numbers. I keep on getting these reminders that we've got a meeting. It's this new app thing that I've got, and it just won't get off my screen. So it's right across your face, by the way. It's pretty funny. So yeah, I see that.
I use the Rising Serpent. The Rising Serpent. You don't see it. The Rising Serpent is on the bottom of our screen there. You referred.
I see. I see Rising Serpent. Rising Serpent is awesome.
No, you referred to him about 10 minutes ago, and people probably are still wondering. That's the last person that you referred to, so it came up. Okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I have observed who's been kicked off of Twitter. I'm very interested in it. January 6th was the big purge. Then there was, a second purge and then a third purge. And I kind of had a sense that the purge was coming from my relationship to people over at Periscope. I knew in August of last year that they were going to do some cleaning up of house. I didn't realize
there was cleaning up to do. There was actually bona fide cleaning up to do.
Oh yeah,
that I get.
Yeah, and I was a part of the beta, so I knew the way they felt that the system was being, the way the system was inoperable the way it was, and one of the big reasons it was inoperable, that they needed to clean it up, was because of the amount of bad use of Twitter that then migrated over to Periscope. And we had this conversation, so I did expect it. I didn't expect it with as aggressively as it was. But then again, I also look at the people over the last several years who have been kicked off of Twitter, and I think one of the things that I find in common amongst them is that they're a lot of them have never worked inside of a corporate environment, or they don't have that appearance of having worked inside of a corporate environment. They've never had that kind of hierarchy and the rigidness that comes within having a boss and having kind of a behavior that's expected of you that needs to be compliant within the house rules, right? And so I see a lot of people who've been kicked off don't even know the language that's required in order to get along in that type of a workplace collaborative type of environment, where the language that they were using on Twitter was kind of what I think of as social language, which has a kind of an abruptness to it in a certain way. While as when you and I are in a corporate environment, we know we have to be very gentle on how we articulate the language we use, how we articulate it. That language that we use in the office is not the same language that we would use outside of the office. So if we have displeasure at home or within a social relationship, we would say it one way. We certainly wouldn't say it the same way within a corporate environment, right? And the people who
Well,
are
you haven't been to my house. It sounds very much like a colloquy among counsel.
yeah, but nevertheless, it's still a lot of the people who've been kicked off have never had that experience of having to work within a sandbox where you have to get along, and where there's always a snitch or two who's looking to shoot you down, and there's always kind of the factions that exist. So I've seen a lot of people that talk very carelessly, very recklessly, the way they communicate. And in fact, it's really not considerate of everybody else who might be following, the comments. So some part of it is it's not that it's surprising to me, but I think they overstayed their welcome, and they did it to themselves.
But are you talking about style, or you're saying that by virtue of an abrasive style, that they're more likely to get caught on some kind of technical violation?
I'm saying that they lack the awareness of themselves. So, I watched Twitter for so many years, and I saw, and I also watched kind of people's behavior within a work environment, and then how it kind of crosses the transom to social media. And I think that in social media, we had a lot of people that felt they were hijacking the platform. Milo is a great example of that. And I never followed Milo, so I've got no commentary on him being a good or a bad person or anything that he said. I remember when he was finally kicked off for trolling a comedian, and that was genuinely hijacking the Twitter platform. I mean, I understand there's a comedic kind of a whimsy to it, but it was still kind of appropriating it for his own kind of use, right? He converted Twitter for his own use without any thought of, the professional implications it was having to that comedian, to the movie that was being made, to everything else. How he was kind of subverting, the messaging of a big advertiser as well. So, but he's never worked within a corporate environment, so he doesn't know what he can do and he can't do. And now that you've got a gig economy world where you've got everybody atomized and fragmented, people don't know the rules that you and I have learned about how to communicate in a corporate environment. They don't even know what it's like to have a boss that you can't berate.
Well, part of it's a corporate environment thing, and part of it is our age. We came of age before texting, well before texting. But we came of age in the time when corporate communications were dictated, transcribed, reviewed, revised, sent in final, and then the recipient read it when the mail got to them, whether internally or externally, and they went through the same process to respond. And people choose their words much more carefully when they're not so free. So, that's part of the corporate environment, but it's also part of the technological environment. And also, I think, just also the social environment. People, listen, I'm not naive. I didn't grow up in some sort of, in a royal court or something. But there was always understood to be the difference between the way I talk on the playground and the way you might talk indoors, in the house with your parents around. And we, to a large extent, social media, I think, going with your hypothesis here, is dominated by people for whom that distinction, I think, is much less acute than it was for us, because of the different way people grew up, not in the 60s and 70s, but in the 90s, and also because of people growing up using social media and texting and using shorthands, and I text with people and they will just all of a sudden disappear. I'm in the middle of a conversation. In fact, the person could have just asked me a question, and I think I'm in the middle of having a conversation, and then you disappeared for 3 hours. Where were you? Well, that's how we millennials do it. We'll get back to you. I can't conceive of that at all. Having said that, though, Adam, would you say that what you're describing is something that you can see on both ends of the ideological spectrum in terms of that abrasiveness filtering?
Well, keep in mind, so I see what's happening to your followers, and I see what's happening to a lot of people that I follow here, and we've spoken offline and DM'd. But I'm not observing what's happening to the liberals and what's happening to the left and what's happening to Mike Tracy, what's happening to Greenwald, what's happening to their kind of Twitter environment.
Well, Tracy and Greenwald are interesting choices that you made because they're now being retweeted by conservatives.
Are they really?
Oh, of course. I mean, those are both people I follow. I followed Tracy on and off for many, many years, and he can be a jerk and he can be very blind about things, but he does tell it like he sees it. And that, of course, is Greenwald all the way. And they've both been thrown under the bus by the left.
Yeah, but Tracy doesn't get along well with others.
No, that's 100% right.
I've always thought about two different kind of business models, right? And one of them is kind of the Mike Cernovich model, which is more oriented towards, the conservatives, I suppose, kind of the liberal conservatives, and how you can turn that into a business. And that's really kind of what he's done with Hoax the movie and, with a lot of other types of things.
The books and
Yeah, the books. And he's been able to kind of build up a platform by that, which is not a singularly one. It's not a one-person effort, right? It requires a lot of collaboration with a lot of people. And it requires a lot of discussion and kind of sharing what's in your head. Very difficult to share what's in your head, to take what's in your head and then transfer it to a lot of other people, to communicate it.
And to do that without making gigantic faux pas. I mean, the filtering mechanism.
Yeah, and then I see on the left, I've always thought about Michael Tracy, and I've tried watching him, and he's unwatchable, not just because he's prolix, and that's kind of irritating in itself, but because he is he clearly doesn't get along well with other people. His style, just even in encountering the camera, is kind of, there's a cynical quality to it, and there's kind of a berating type of quality to it, and there's even an inconsistency that I find true with a lot of the liberals, but he doesn't get along well with other people, so he could never build that as a business model. Whereas I see Glenn Greenwald can, and I'm sure that Glenn Greenwald is probably going to now go make movies and do the other type of things as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but I'm glad that you quote somewhat, some of the things I've thought about that. So I do see a lot of people getting kicked off, and now we're seeing cute people get kicked off. And so I wanted to discuss some of the things where we left off. And so Alex, WHI, Alex, 771-24598. I don't know how you got those numbers. I don't know if you get to choose those numbers, right? And I like the picture that you choose. And that's Christian Bale, I think. So I should turn that off. No, but I won't. Is asking, what are the topics tonight, Adam? I want to continue with where we left off. And where we left off was in September. Kyle Rittenhouse had just been there was a plebiscite, right? That was the first time that we really saw a plebiscite in the media, in social media. And as you said it, I forget the way you described it, and I was looking at the clip today, but they were not allowing him to defend himself. They were not allowing his lawyers to defend him. And yet he was being attacked within social media. So they weren't allowing him to defend himself. They weren't allowing his lawyers to defend him. And they weren't even allowing kind of the casual observer to not even just defend him, but to just make observations about the merits of his case.
Right. What's the question?
Well, I wanted to pick
You're
up.
100% accurate.
So Alex was saying that, and I wanted to pick up from where that was. I also wanted to pick up from where we've seen kind of the cues being just very aggressively dropped off of social media. And what started off with like a Thomas Victor, I guess, probably about 3 years ago, we're now seeing that anything that's outside of the CNN parameters is now getting kicked off. I mean, it's just either you're CNN or you're not at this point, right?
That even I wouldn't go that far, because after all, I am here and I am tweeting alternatives to the narrative. I was once locked. I was told that I would be suspended unless I deleted a tweet.
What was the tweet?
It was a tweet where I quoted that African-American woman doctor who had said that there was a cure for COVID-19 and it was HCQ and zinc. And I quoted her and they told me that had to come down. That wasn't the hill I was going to die on. There were a million other ways to communicate the same message. I
got the same thing happen to me. And Donald Trump Jr. retweeted me, and I paid the price. Yeah. I really paid a price for that. I was shadow banned for probably about a month afterwards, and I kind of watched it in real time.
So, having said that, though, I mean those are out there. The choices that they make about what to filter and how to filter and how to censor. It's censorship. I'm not to kid ourselves about this. Are really stupid, and they're ham-fisted, and to a large extent, I believe they are being implemented, supervised, and created by the same people you are describing, people without a background in grown-up organizations or in grown-up discourse, who are probably in their 30s or younger, and to a large extent, their lack of maturity and depth is what is being reflected in the arbitrary and irrational and readily circumvented choices that they've made about censorship. Although it's interesting that you talk about the censorship of Q people. Forget about Thomas. Thomas is in a category by himself. He's an artist. But the better question for me is, why did Q last as long as it did on Twitter? And there is a school of thought that says that it was a Democrat or a leftist or globalist, however you want to call it, psyop to lure, or is the word lure, to get conservatives and Republicans to have an irrational belief that the system was actually functioning, law enforcement and investigatory, and all the things that are supposed to happen, like the Department of Justice being, available for, investigating and prosecuting crimes that are not only committed by Republicans.
Was that I've seen some of the that interview that Jack Posobiec did on OAN with kind of the origin story of it, and there's a lot to get into. So I want to be responsive to somebody who said what's coming next, but I'm so interested in this. I saw the origin story of Q because I don't really know that much about it. I'm not sure how much of it needed to be a psyop, because some of the people that were kicked off, and Brian Cates and some other people who were kicked off, who I'm sure are just really wonderful people, but they were really adherents of this kind of, there's a secret plan. And from what I understand, I think I saw somebody, Julia Song or something, tweet yesterday that there are people who are still saying this type of stuff, that there's a secret plan.
What Julia tweeted yesterday was, it wasn't Ted Cruz who went to Cancun. It wasn't Ted. In other words, they've reached the level of conspiracy thinking that they can extend it to across conspiracies. So not only is Trump going to be, not only is he waiting in the wings, and the investigation is about to be tied up, and the fake Joe Biden, who I mean, it's this crazy.
Are you serious? But are you serious? Because I don't know about any of this.
Yeah, yeah. This is all stuff you could. Yeah, definitely. This is all stuff that you can find even still on Twitter. But you'll find more of it on some of the alternative platforms, and that's easy come, easy go. That's what you get. So, to some extent, I was taken in. I don't think I was ever a true trust the plan guy, but I did say this. I said, first of all, I found it hard to believe that Barr was really going to be as ineffectual as he seems to have been on issues of corruption and the corruption of the law enforcement process and the Trump Russia and all that stuff. There was no action whatsoever on election fraud. And anyone who doesn't think there was election fraud, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist. I was there. It happened. There was election fraud. But also that people who were the most enthusiastic about Trump's reelection, the most enthusiastic wanted him to be reelected because they thought he was extraordinarily intelligent and able, and he didn't care what people thought of him. He cared about getting the job done. And I said, okay, if that's true, if he's as good as you say he is, then you can't say that he's letting all this happen and not without any accountability. So either Trump is what you say he is, and he should be reelected because, and therefore it makes sense that he's letting this kabuki go on in order to, get the big sting at the end, or he is not even remotely what you think he is. He's actually a putz because he's been in office for 4 years. And I don't care how many times you tell me that he's getting bad advice from the people around him. He's supposed to be Donald Trump. Let him line people up outside his office and fire them one at a time until he finds who's responsible to get the job done.
I'll give you and it's going off on a tangent, but I like going off on tangents. And it's dinner with.
If anyone wants their money back on this stream, they can just.
So it's really interesting because I'll give you my take on Trump and on Barr.
Don't tell me Docs in 67 there was no fraud. I was at the Philadelphia Conference Center. Why wouldn't they let us in to watch them counting the mail-in votes?
Well, let's respond to that point. I'm not ready for that point, though. Let's respond to that point.
I know, but it's in my face.
I put it up there, so that we
don't forget it. I'm sorry.
We can be excited to discuss it next. But I'll tell you my take on it. I told you in August I expected Trump to lose, right? I remember.
Yes, you guaranteed it.
Yeah, I guaranteed it. And I remember how upset you were. And I remember we were talking about your daughters and, what comes next. And,
my granddaughters. I have only sons, and at the time I only had granddaughters.
Yeah. And, you were taking it kind of bad. And I was telling you because I wanted to see your emotional reaction to it. To how you were going to people only have a very small amount of emotional reservoir. And it had been depleted so quickly in fighting the Trump battles on behalf of Trump as kind of his auxiliary that I wanted to see how you were going to respond to it. And so my take on it was, and everybody knows I try and be very kind of politically disembodied, right? Because I'm writing my log and, it is what it is. And I saw that, and I've worked in corporations. So just as I've learned language skills and a certain type of cordiality and etiquette working in corporations and being very high up and having to interact with a lot of people, I've also seen what it's like to have to manage within a corporation in terms of the staff that's within them, how to manage your internal and external staff. So I thought that Trump had zero chance. I remember going out in 2016, I expected Trump to win. And I remember telling everyone that he has zero chance of reelection. I didn't know what the circumstances and mechanisms that would be employed. I certainly didn't expect the small cabal to be announced. Lee Smith wrote that article on the oligarchs, when the oligarch took over Athens, the 30 tyrants, the 30 oligarchs. And, he's right that they want us to know. It's a really good conversation to have. At the same time, I don't think Trump could have done anything He couldn't have fired or hired. There was nobody that he was going to be able to put in who was going to be able to change a sickness that's made its way into the trunk of the body of our.
Probably right. Probably right. No, I don't think that when you predicted that victory, that I anticipated, that I understood you as saying that I thought you were saying he was going to lose the election in the traditional sense of losing an election.
No, I never said that. I said he was going to lose.
Right. No, but that's why I understood.
If you call somebody a tyrant, and if you call somebody Hitler, you have a moral obligation to take that person out,
regardless of what measures you have to use, because the end justifies the means.
If you call, but this is reality.
No. I understand the reality that they created for themselves.
If you call somebody a tyrant, you have to take that person out. And if you call somebody Hitler and a tyrant, and you use all the imagery, and we can certainly argue on kind of the quantifying and qualifying it, because people don't even know what Hitler is anymore, which is a horrible thing. But if you call somebody a tyrant and you call somebody Hitler, then the populace has a moral obligation to take that person out.
And not only the populace, though, because one of the things I was recently talking to a lawyer friend of mine, I said this in another podcast, but no one's going to watch two of my podcasts, right? Somebody said to me, but none of us thought that there was no court that would entertain the question, at least prior to the election, prior to the inauguration, when it mattered, of whether plainly fraudulent and unconstitutional conduct was something that the courts had any business reviewing. Everyone, all of us figured sooner or later, there's a key that unlocks that door, because that's the business that the courts are in. And what we found out is that
no. Because I've spent the last 4 years of my life really reading a lot of philosophy. I mean, literally, I have probably read Thucydides' history, Machiavelli, so many different kind of political scientists. Machiavelli is my favorite. Thucydides is my favorite historian. And I've read them so many times. And I've read Locke's take on it, and I've read Strauss's take on Machiavelli, that I've really tried to understand justice, and I've tried to understand what justice is from a practical point of not, what we've been how we've been instructed, but for the last 2,500 years, really, what is justice and who employs justice? And it's the elites that employ justice, and it's power that employs justice. And Trump was never truly in power.
That's correct. And a lot, and what I think one of his achievements is, whether intended or otherwise, I think it was intended, just not quite the way it came out, was that by virtue of being who he was and being how he was in what he did force what had been a submerged aspect of the elite control of institutions and processes to emerge and allow themselves to be seen, because he was such a clear and present danger.
That was expected. That was expected too, because again, this is all history. It's so interesting. And I'm telling you, one day when I release this history, this chronicle I'm writing, and it's going to be in the form of several documentaries, but also in a book form. And it's really interesting how all of this has really happened before. And if you have a Trump that threatens them, they always come back and hit you 1,000 times worse. It's why when a tyrant takes over, or when there's a new emperor or a new prince, and Darren Beatty can discuss this a lot better than I can, so I'm just going to misrepresent. I'm just going to say something wrong. But that new prince has to come in, and either A, you kill all the opposition, or you make friends with them, but there's nothing in the middle. And Trump was not given that kind of medium, a happy place in the middle. Further, Obama was the most profligate president in human history, in American history. He was kind of a Persian prince. He was Darius, right? And the promise of Biden, or of a Democrat administration, was the even bigger. It was the most. If you think Obama was profligate, their pitch was really, if you think Obama was profligate, we are just going to open up the piggy bank in terms of HHS, in terms of the Department of Education, all of these trillions of dollars were going to be ripped open, and they are, with no disclosure whatsoever. So I expected all of this because this is what I'm doing now, right? It's kind of my life, and I was able to emotionally reconcile myself with Trump losing. So we're going to get into some questions because there's some really interesting stuff here, and I want to talk about the election. I want to talk about the people from Q who are getting kicked off. So if people have questions about the people from Q who are getting kicked off, very curious to draw and strike Brian Cates. Brian Cates, who I think was a really nice guy, actually. Very thoughtful.
He is, and he and I were pretty friendly. I don't say we're because we're not friends anymore, but he's not around, so we don't have a lot of opportunity to communicate.
He seems like a very, very thoughtful person, genuinely a very compassionate person. He would just became enmeshed in that whole world. So Doxson67, thank you so much for being here. What a beautiful picture. It looks like a Japanese cherry tree, doesn't it? Right? It just hasn't fully blossomed yet. It's really pretty. Thank you for sharing that. And says there was no fraud in the election. And I want to respond to that first because, of course, we all have to be cautious with our words here. And I'm really interested in how Ron's going to respond equally cautious, though, right? Is that I believe that there was ample evidence that required interrogation, and that wasn't. And I feel like there was a dead body that was found, right? And right next to that bloodied body that was had stab wounds. Sorry for the graphic image, right? But right next to that bloody, so there was a body that was found with multiple stab wounds, and then right next to the bloody body was a bloody knife. And the detective who entered the room showed no interest in either the bloody body or the bloody knife, and the case was closed as a suicide. So I just feel like there was no interrogation. There was very little intellectual kind of curiosity by the left.
No, I mean because curiosity is something that people who are genuinely interested in the truth have, and the press understood that its well-compensated, comfortable role as simulators of entertainment that looked like what used to be considered journalism, which was also a kind of entertainment and which was also highly filtered and ideological, but nonetheless departed from the script from time to time. They understand now that their role is to be part of the elite governing caste. And no questions shall be asked. And you're getting puff pieces about Biden's public displays of affection with his wife and playing Mario Kart with his grandchildren.
Is that what it is? I don't pay attention, so I don't know the stories that they're giving him. Some people have been very thoughtful with giving me some really interesting stories, but other than that, I don't know kind of recreational stories.
Nothing. No, listen, I mean, he walks out of news conferences without answering questions. He snaps at reporters. I mean, I don't have to repeat this stuff. Everybody who is watching is aware of it. The point is, there are two things going on. One is that the legacy media brands, which call themselves the press or journalism, are just media brands. And they are aligned with one political party, and they realize that that's where the bread is buttered, and that, in fact, where future employment comes from. And then after they leave government, it's the same thing as administrative capture in government with lobbyists. The press is just another form of that. But also what they have begun to master quite effectively is demonizing their competition, delegitimizing their competition, so that Fox and OAN and Newsmax in turn are considered to be, or the New York Post. When the New York Post ran the Hunter Biden story, as if it would have mattered, it wouldn't have, because of the body and the knife. But they locked out the New York Post, the competition of the elite media, even though it is itself what we call in Yiddish nishta hin and nishta her. It straddles the fence. But someone got a scoop and decided that we were going to publish this and we're going to tell this story. They locked him out for a week or 2 weeks from their own account.
Did you expect that story to have a more profound effect on the election?
No. One thing that people, I think, have to be very clear on is that no stories have an effect on the election. I was amazed when friends of mine, like Will Chamberlain, tweeted, Trump lost this election because he mishandled COVID. No votes. 0 votes were affected. People who like Trump, one of the harshest things you learn as a trial attorney is that for all your preparation and all your work, there is a very strong school of thought that the jury makes up its mind in the first half a day at the most of a trial. So I believe that I think that the movement of the needle on who liked Trump and who liked whatever that alternative would be was decided sometime no later than 2018. And no news development would have changed it. It was just a matter of a struggle over how the process was going to go. So I don't think COVID mattered, and I don't think Hunter Biden, the laptop, whoever doubted that the Bidens were corrupt? You have that Ukrainian thing. So, I don't think it had any effect.
Yeah, and I'll tell you my take on the lockdowns. And Will Chamberlain, and he's a friend also, and Will Chamberlain is awesome. I was actually just watching him today, and I've never watched Tim Pool, but I actually watched his appearance on Tim Pool twice now, which is unusual for me. And I know Tim's a friend of yours, and I've got to say, Tim has been very successful at moving himself off of Twitter and onto YouTube. He's a leading indicator because he saw what's happening, and he's really been good at crossing that transom.
And you mentioned before we went on the air that I'm in the process of doing that as well, though I'm no Tim Pool.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Will Chamberlain was one of many conservatives that really promoted the lockdowns. You, myself, Robert Burns, Schachtel, a few other people have been really against the lockdowns from day one. I was probably the most profound of them, right? In a way, you got to admit, I was pretty spot on. But that's because I've been studying this, and I'm like, holy crap, they're going to shut down everything. It's going to be the militarization of the police. I saw this all coming. And I don't think Will lives very much in the moment. And Will is kind of looking at the litigation that's on his desk now, and he's not considering kind of what happens to it in 2 years. So I've actually got tweets from Will that I keep for my log. I'm afraid to share them with everybody, but I've got everything.
You mean he doesn't necessarily have a long-term vision? He takes a snapshot and very, very effectively analyzes what's in front of him right now.
Yeah. So what's happening with people, the way people's brains work, people's brains have been rewired because you and I, our careers, you and I, I'm 54, you're about the same age, right? Is
57.
57? You look good. You're good looking.
Oh, that you see, people, you see what a schmoozer this guy is, okay? Yeah. Everyone else out there was saying he's not 67.
Yeah, no, you look good. So what happens is, because we're in such a fragmented, atomized type of society, what's happening now is, you see, you and I, when we grew up, and a lot of people who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are still working now, right, see that when we grew up with a much more generalized type of skill sets, knowledge sets, right? We weren't micro specialists in this and this and this. And when we went on a job, when we worked in a corporation, we were able to go into the marketing department. We were going to the mailing department. We would sit down at the president's desk and we would have coffee, right? That's what you did. We all know that when you're a kid, for your first 40 years, you have the privilege of walking in to the boss's office and picking their brain. And the boss, because they all love kids, are going to spend time with you. And you would go into the different revenue centers.
But they especially love bright young kids like you were when you were in when I was a young lawyer. Yes, there was this kid looks like he might, they were completely wrong, but
our education was very built upon a kind of a more comprehensive kind of worldview and a system view. And our corporate training kind of required that of us to be successful. In order to be successful within a corporate environment, you have to have a good appreciation of the other departments, and you visit with the marketing department. I've been in sales. Marketing department visits with sales. You visit with your chief revenue officer. You visit with the chairman. I would obviously always have meetings with our board of directors. And so you kind of encounter everybody and you see the way the whole organism works, right? You're not just looking at an arm and saying, if I was to describe Ron Coleman, I'm not just going to say give a description of your left arm. I would give a bigger description. But kids today are being trained to just kind of diagnose Ron in terms of a specialist in your left arm, a specialist in your right arm. So kids today, and it was true with Will Chamberlain as well, somewhat, just because of his legal training, and a person is a genius, so I'm not knocking him. What happens is their worldview is they're working at an assembly line, right? And I've managed assembly lines in business all my life, not real assembly lines, but kind of a construction of an assembly line in business. Is they work on an assembly line. They're like a manager at they work on an assembly line. The product makes their way on a conveyor belt to their station. They stamp it, and then it leaves their station and goes on to mystery. So it arrives from mystery, right? They stamp it, and then it gets delivered onto the next station, and then it's gone. And this is kind of that hot take phenomenon is so people today, the way they're being conditioned is they have no view of the entire assembly line that they're operating within.
Hot takes in particular. I mean, there is no accountability except for purposes of the wokeness and finding the thing that people said that's been decided last week was politically incorrect. But no one is ever held to account for their incorrect predictions, for their bad advice. Once you become a brand, you continue to be a talking head brand, and you have to really, really cross the line. And even then, if Dan Rather had crossed the line that he crossed, now instead of when he crossed it, he would still be employed.
Yeah, I don't know, and this is a conversation that I'm going to continue with Lee Smith part 2, and it's a conversation I had with Sundance offline from the conservative Treehouse, the Last Refugee 2. Because they've got very good theories on what's happening now in terms of that the elites really want us to know. So Dan Rather might be
want us to know that they're in charge.
Yeah,
100%. That's why they're not hiding it anymore. Definitely.
Now, do you want to see Will Chamberlain's tweet from March?
Of course I do. You're offering it.
It does. If everyone's curious, I'm going to show it to everybody. And it's not a criticism of Will Chamberlain. I want people to understand this. I am not upset with any of the conservatives. I'm not upset with any of the liberals. I truly think they're wonderful people. Will Chamberlain is an absolute genius. Everybody else,
and we are very friendly with him, and he's done lots. We owe him a great deal.
He's awesome. And it's not even that I disagree with him. I don't disagree with Will or anybody else. I disagree with the analyst that gave him that informed that opinion. Because they gave him very flawed information. So he based his opinions on very flawed, imperfect information. And that's what happened. So I blame the people that provided that information and gave it authority. Here is Will Chamberlain's tweet. Is everyone ready to see something? I'm going to look at the comments first. I'm going to look at the comments. If everyone's interested in seeing it, maybe Nancy will come out here and she'll say something also. So hold on. If everyone wants to see it, I'm gonna show it. You know what? I'm just gonna show it. And again, all respect to Will Chamberlain, not knocking him at all. He's a friend. He's a genius. I admire him.
Doesn't matter. He does Tim Pool now. Doesn't matter what you say about him. He's bigger than both of us.
No, he was the original Stop This Steal, and people don't even give him credit for that. They look at him as being some type of a lesser, and I disagree with that. So can everybody see that? Let me see if I can make it even bigger. Hold on. I don't know if I can make it any bigger.
Oh, yeah, on this stuff for sure. Yeah.
Can you see that? Can everybody see that?
Sure.
Okay, so and again, I like him, so I'm not saying anything bad about him. It's just that in March, right, I was very intrigued. Let me try and take this thing off now so it doesn't stay there the entire time. In March, I was very intrigued by how people could think this. And because I thought they were wrong. And I saw this whole fast roll up of power and the bad information they were given. So I'm very curious about Doxin 67. When you say there's no fraud in the election, I'm not sure if there's a humor to what you're saying. And their humor is kind of antagonistic, which is cool because it is kind of funny, right? And or if you're not, and either way, I think it deserves a response. So if you could, help me out. And so here is, I'm going to look at some comments that I see that are pretty interesting. Chump 240-42266, Draw and Strike and Soulware. I don't know who Soulware was. We're both amazing. I liked Brian. We spoke offline. We were actually going to do a scope once. He got carried away. He did, and I like him a lot. He got carried away, and I didn't. I didn't, want to break his heart in the same way I had to break Ron's heart, in the same way I broke Will Chamberlain's heart long before the election, or Alan Bukhari, because we all had these conversations, because he was so emotionally invested in it, and it made him very fragile. And I didn't think, while I tested Ron and I could see that Ron was resilient, I don't think Brian had that same resiliency at the time. So I can't really say. So Deborah Stemp, thank you so much for being here. And I think you've changed your picture. So that's a wonderful picture. Why do they care about Q people now? Trump is gone.
Why do the polls, until fairly recently, continue talking about the Jews? Because a good scapegoat is a Proud Boys. No, the Proud Boys, the Proud Boys. Proud Boys didn't do anything. Proud Boys didn't do the riot in Washington or whatever you want to call it. Proud Boy, like they identify a demon. Q, like there are no Q people. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's a way, and also what they do is they bleed They're doing two things. They're focusing on an identifiable, contemptible, deplorable enemy, one, and two, they tar everyone with the brush of that enemy. So it's not just there are Q people or there are white supremacists or there are Proud Boys among the right, but that all the right is deplorable. All the right is the same as Proud Boys. All the right is the same, or by the way, there's nothing wrong with the Proud Boys. Some of my best friends are Proud Boys. And all the right are Q people. Even if they are Q people, they're entitled to, it's no worse than being a communist. I mean, they are under serious misunderstandings of how the world works, and there's a real innocence there. There's a real appeal there. They really believe that the America, and this goes back to, many of your earlier comments, that the system really, really does work, that Donald Trump really was that good. And the people who we believe have been stabbing us in the back are going to go to jail for it. That's such a terrible thing, but they're not violent people. They're not insurrectionists. There was no insurrection anyway, an unarmed insurrection. I don't see Q people on Twitter anymore. Says seal 99999. They are more carefully cloaked. But if you know the code words and you know the hints and the allusions, you'll see that they're still there. Oh, Brian, we don't hear you.
I muted myself for a second because I'm panicking here. I'm working on my computer, and I'm running out of juice on the computer, so I'm switching over my other computer.
Oh,
so
that's going to be a trick.
While you respond to this, Rising Serpent, again, thank you so much for being
here.
Right.
Rising Serpent is not just not just any commenter. Go ahead, do your thing, and I'll talk to Rising Serpent.
I know, and I'm Rising Serpent. No, I don't need that, my lover. Thank you. Rising Serpent is also somebody we speak offline as well as I do with Election, Wizard Predicts, and Columbia Bugle. And there's some people who've chosen to remain anonymous that I think that are really awesome. And I'm very intrigued by why they've chosen that way to kind of, in a way, give back. Because I really do feel that in a way they're kind of giving back and willing to give up a little bit of their identity. I don't mean their name identity, but their own kind of personal,
Their
intimate.
psychic identity, right? Because like when you spend hours a day being a maskless person, and you achieve, when people achieve, they want recognition for their achievements. My name is on those things up there. See, look, and then you go and you make up a new identity, and you achieve under the name of that identity. And no, Lois Lane, I got news for you. I'm actually Superman. And actually, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. You got to either be Superman or be Clark Kent. So Clark, Rising Serpent, how do we win future elections? I think there is a path. I think it involves focusing on statewide elections as well as local elections at the level of, everyone knew that Soros was doing this, everyone. Putting money into attorney general races. Attorney generals were then given the power by institutions and deferred to improperly to a great extent by the judicial branch to give attorneys general of the various states virtually plenary power over the application of election law and also the privilege of deciding what criminal statutes will and will not be enforced across categories. I mean, this idea that started during the Obama administration that attorneys general or district attorneys of various cities would and make announcements, we're no longer going to enforce this part of the criminal statutes. We're just going to nullify the and the legislature stood by, didn't have to make any tough calls, and the executive above. Okay, so that all happened. It is still possible, I believe, because I think that the election fraud system is widespread, but it's not universal.
Let me ask you a question, and this is for both of you, and it's actually for everybody. Is what difference does it make if elections are won if it's essentially the same outcome?
So to answer your question, and this goes back to our discussion in October, why am I still fighting these cases? You said, Ron, maybe you didn't do this publicly. This might have been one of our private discussions. Ron, you can keep fighting these lawsuits. They're not going to make a difference. You're not going to get anywhere with them. And my answer to you is, this is what I do. This is what I'm built for and equipped for. This is what I've been doing for 30 years. I lost another one today. Maybe it'll be overturned. Maybe it won't. When I do get one overturned, I get a feather from the Supreme Court. Okay. But this is what I do. I still believe there's enough daylight, enough oxygen in the system. And I think it was that was proved, not through the judicial system or the political system, but in the GameStop incident. And you're much better qualified to discuss this than I am, because you understand money and investing and have money and have invested. And I am zero at all of those things. But to me, the GameStop story, which was exhilarating while it lasted, demonstrated that this is not Russia or China, that a one-party state can come in and all of a sudden take over all institutions, put all its people into a nomenclatura, and govern. It is a highly developed, technocratic, individualistic, non-centralized, and socially independent-minded, I said individualistic, society that I think has many, many surprises up its sleeves. So although I think that we tend to be overly focused on what we read about in the news and what we hear on the news programs. I remember even noticing that before things became so incredibly contentious as they are now, that the TV news, and I don't think this was always the case, but for the last 10 years at least, always started out with, what did the president do today? As if that had the slightest bearing on anyone's lives. It virtually never did.
Okay, but still, what? And this is a question for everybody, so I'm going to see everyone's response. I'm very interested in everybody's. It's an inquiry that's out there, so I'm very interested in everybody else's kind of comments on it, including yours, Ron, and Rising Serpent. And I see it, Wizard Predicts is actually here, so I'm delighted to I didn't realize that at the time. But what difference does it make? For example, with the Georgia election, my kind of thought was that Loeffler and Perdue were always there to lose. And now that these mail drop boxes have become the norm, right? I think they're never going to go away, no matter what people think. Just like when you build up these a fortress in Washington D.C. and behind a wall, it's never going to get dismantled. Those mailboxes are never going to go away. So now politicians who are vying for that office are going to say that the only way that I have a chance of winning is to embrace it, kind of the vitality of the thing, and ultimately their outcome of the election is going to be the same thing no matter who wins. It's just going to be a rhetorical difference.
So that's one possibility. If I would have said to you in 1950, are the Jim Crow laws going to ever go away? Would you have said to me, oh no, there's definitely a path to a civil rights movement. There's going to be a tremendous openness to extending civil liberties to black. I think you wouldn't have, Brian. I think you would have said, Ron, we've grown up in corporate environments. We see how people who are in charge maintain being in charge. Look at those guys in the South. They're absolutely prepared. They use dogs and tear gas. They're here to, they control all the local organs. They've got the judges. They've got the governors. Be realistic, Ron. It's not going to happen. That's exactly what you would have said, Brian. History is full of surprises. And if you, in fact, predicted the GameStop shock, then you must have made an additional fortune to the fortune that you have now. And that would explain why you're such a good mood tonight.
I didn't, but the point is still the same.
No, it's not.
But how can we have this kind of a renewal?
You're missing. So listen to what I'm saying.
Want to be renewed
about the TV news. You're thinking of who wins the big election, who gets the starring role, and Soros saw. Everyone's focusing on the state house and the governor. I'm going to get the district attorney in. And in America, these are complex systems, just like the financial system is a complex system. And ironically, the complexities have often been put in there to serve the elites. But there's a world of people, the hacker mentality, and also there's an entire kind of mentality of people who are experts at finding holes, finding wrinkles, finding creases, finding opportunities that other people don't see. And that's what happened with Soros and the district attorneys, and with the so the point is, there are ways to make these elections matter, and all you need is a couple of people who are prepared to depart from the narrative to completely change everything. And by the way, there are tomorrow the Supreme Court, or was it today, is considering the election challenges. We don't know that story yet. I don't know, but I do think you're asking the right question, and everyone's asking that question. What's the point of future elections? What's the point of winning if you have a uniparty?
Wow, hold on for a second.
Now let me talk to you a little bit about what Will Chamberlain told me about Adam. There's some serious issues here, and Will is much too much of a gentleman to discuss those publicly. But we are in sort of Adam's friends have been talking about how do we manage the situation? How do we get him to sort of mainstream his approach and have a little bit more of, a little bit less of the sort of that overarching, big picture illusion that he has, which is that he is a uniquely insightful historical figure, whereas the rest of us are, sort of just pygmies, living in the moment. And we talk about it, and we really love him dearly, and that's why I think it's going to work out just fine. But it'll be painful.
You see that? You see what I did? I heard everything you said too.
I wouldn't have said anything that I wouldn't want you to hear.
Yeah, no, it was really funny. So, I want to look for Election Wizard's comment again. So let me just scroll up. But my comment, and I want people to think about it, because I'm not, and I'm going to look for Election Wizard, or Wizard Predicts, excuse me. So I want to find their comment, but my thought is still, and I'm sorry, Wizard, if you could retweet that'd be really awesome, because I really wanted to discuss that. It was about Barr, but so my question is still that what difference does it make if the GOP regain some seats, which I would expect them to, but what difference does it make if it doesn't make a difference, if the policy outcomes are essentially the same? Then are we just getting some type of is it just a vanity metric?
You're not asking me, right? Because I've already answered that question. I don't accept your premise.
You don't accept my premise.
But if your premise is correct, then there is no question.
Hold on, okay. So
if your premise is correct, then there's no question. Then we're doomed. We're on our way towards a corporate technocratic oligarchical system, and we'll probably be relatively comfortable for most of us. But there isn't going to be liberty, and there isn't going to be a lot of opportunity for our children.
This is why we all have to invest, and this is why I've done the investor series, because the only way to survive and actually to flourish for ourselves and for our children is to invest, because that's how they're all paying themselves. It's not like money is disappearing. It's just that the distribution of wealth has changed so dramatically that it's no longer the lower managers and the lower middle managers and the lower income people that are going to be able to acquire wealth. Clearly, the attempt right now by the elites is to confiscate it. So Wizard Predicts, thank you so much for being here. Legal question, it's all you. The state of legal profession post Donald J. Trump. Awful seeing attorneys threaten other attorneys for representing Donald J. Trump. Ron.
Attorneys in corporate law firms have lost the ability to represent conservatives for the foreseeable future. I lost, one way or another, 2 jobs in corporate law firms because of my involvement with right of center causes. I'm now partners with Harmeet Dillon because we are basically an alternative law firm. Even though we do have corporate clients that do commercial work, but most of the public companies are not going to want to have anything to do with us. They're part of the elite system, and the corporate law firms that cut and run on Trump, and Harmeet was vociferously public and explicit about this. The idea that a Jones Day sucks millions of dollars a year over multiple years representing the Trump campaign, and then when they start getting threatened, they distance themselves from their own client publicly, is outrageous. So there's no future. I mean, those firms are going to make millions of dollars per partner without the help of conservatives. That's fine. But the answer is lawyers such as myself are going to have to find refuge in alternative practices. And we have not yet reached the point, but we probably will soon, where both bar, disciplinary authorities, and the judiciary will start joining in. And this was the beginning of what was happening in the Flynn outrage, where not only did the DC Circuit Court of Appeals agree that a judge could hire a new prosecutor to satisfy the judge that someone wasn't getting off appropriately, but that bar associations and the criminal defense bar would either join in on the side of the elites in that case, or be silent. So we're moving in that direction. But as of right now, I do think it is true that lawyers can practice law, but we can't practice in corporate settings. And it's just as well, because corporate settings are disgusting. I had a relative who worked for one of the biggest companies in the world, which was known as a relatively unwoke environment, all things being equal, and the changes that have taken place there in the last year have made it intolerable.
You and I both, I had a relationship with Rush Limbaugh that went back 20 years because we were one of his biggest advertisers. And, I can't say I had a good relationship with him, but I certainly can't say I had it bad. And I'm a liberal, and I disliked him ideologically for his support of the 2000 war, 2000, the invasion of Iraq, his kind of endorsement of it. And he was the 2 more weeks of his generation, because him and David Brooks, the New York Times particularly, were always saying, just give us 6 more months and we can win this war. And but
the problem was the nation building.
Yeah, but at the same time, we were, and I discussed this a little bit during a Periscope yesterday. We were my company was constantly being bombarded by our clients, by law firms, and a whole bunch of other people telling us that we're not allowed to do that. They will leave us if we continue to advertise on Rush Limbaugh, and we disregarded all. We disregarded all of them. At the same time, this was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, this goes way back with Rush Limbaugh. And had it been today, I don't think we would have been able to resist kind of the digital, what Rising Serpent calls digital Antifa, which I think about a lot. Just this digital Antifa, I don't think we would have been able to resist it and its amplification and all the kind of the tactics that it employs. I think we would have had to concede to the mob and stop advertising on Rush Limbaugh, honestly.
Well, I think to some extent there are that social media has also allowed pushback on that. I don't think Goya suffered from the attempt to damage it. I think, in fact, that their sales went through the roof, and that they ended up smelling like a rose. It's a matter, however, of nerve. And by and large, the people who make it to the top in the corporate world lack it. They are extremely risk averse, as are most successful lawyers. So the risk averse personalities that run large institutions, especially as they control more and more power and wealth, they have more and more to lose by risking it. So there's not an entrepreneurial spirit. There is a highly conservative spirit, but not conservative in the traditional political sense, but rather conservative in terms of a fear of repercussions. I mean, the last firm that I was turned out of, they said, you're representing, Gavin McInnes. And people are going to think that our firm represents Nazis. And they said, well, do you tell them about who the partner is who's representing Rush Limbaugh, that he's an Orthodox Jew? Well, we don't want to, and that the reason we're defending him is because he's being wrongly accused of being, a white supremacist. Well, no, that's too complicated. We just don't want to deal with having to have the question asked. And that's raising risk aversion to entirely new levels. That's not even risk aversion, that's conflict aversion. And that's how you get a flattening of mores, and reaction, and nothing outrages anyone in a meaningful. There's outraged theater, but every single thing that people had claimed to be outraged about by Donald Trump, including children in cages, immigrant children in cages, non-issues now. So it's.
Do you feel outside of Dillon Law that you would have had that? Do you feel that the job opportunities were shrinking for you, and do you feel that the margins of the business that you now have your billable hours are just much lower?
I have already been an outsider in that respect for a while. I'm not someone who has really had a job in a very long time. I'm a partner with my own practice, and I go wherever it makes sense for me to practice it. If I had to do it Harmeet convinced me that it would make more sense to do what I'm doing with her than to do it by myself. And given the way I keep a set of books, she's 100% right about that. And other reasons, including the fact that it's great to work with Harmeet Dillon. But the opportunity. I mean, first of all, when you've worked in 15 or 16 or 17 law firms, at a certain point you should get the message that you're not cut out for certain kinds of law firms.
Let me go backwards a little bit. When you, after our last Periscope, you then joined a team that was working with Kyle Rittenhouse. Is that correct?
Yes. And then we left that team because at least one of the people involved was increasingly showing that he was unstable and unprofessional, and that we didn't want to continue working with him. It had nothing to do with the merits of the case, that's for sure.
And does that also mean, because it's such an interesting question that Wizard asked, because there's kind of downstream effects. Does that also mean that the lawyers that you're going to see that are able somehow to endure, the conservative lawyers are going to be there's going to be an increasingly flake element to them that you don't have? Are you going to see kind of the flake element on the right?
You bet. Absolutely. You know how many anonymous conservative lawyers on Twitter or who are not on social media at all contact me and tell me how much they wish they could do what I'm doing, but they couldn't? In other words, there are cadres and cadres of conservative lawyers, but they're terrified of being identified as such. Now, look, having said that, I mean, there was a trope going around last week that Donald Trump was so, because of the attorneys being threatened for representing Donald Trump, that he had to use lawyers that would not have been his first choice. That's baloney. I know scores of excellent conservative lawyers who would have picked up the phone, taken on the representation, and they would have done it. Does that mean we're out of time?
No, that means what it means. I'm going to put it on mute while you continue to respond.
Okay. So there are plenty of conservative lawyers and people who are willing to be seen as conservative lawyers. But I will tell you that when I was pulled out of the Pennsylvania election central for the GOP on election night and asked to work on a project with Giuliani, I was introduced to Giuliani by another lawyer who had previously worked for the campaign and who told me he was looking for someone to do what he would have been doing, but his partners told him, we're not going to be involved in challenges to the election. So notwithstanding that dead bloody body and that knife, these lawyers were so cowed, and this was a major national firm, that this guy, and again, the more wealthy you get, if someone who is a partner in a major law firm making multiple, or at least even a single 7-figure annual draw, threatening him, especially if he doesn't control his own business, which is the case in most partners in most major law firms, telling him, we will not let you stay here and continue to make it uncomfortable for us by your representing the President of the United States. That's going to leave Ron Coleman and Harmeet Dillon as your least flaky conservative lawyers. Now, I think I've got a decent reputation among most judges. I'm not considered a flake professionally, but that's where we're going.
But is there now a Lynn Wood effect, right? And I think it was Technofog, or I forget, maybe it was Jack Murphy that was talking about Lynn Wood just a day or two ago. But is there now a Lynn Wood effect that anything kind of that there's a bar, and then anything below that bar is Lynn Woodian?
Well, that's an insult to me. I mean, not with all, I'm sorry for Lynn. I mean, I worked with him on the Rittenhouse case, and he was a gentleman by and large. But right now, that, let's put it this way, it's not true. It's not true. Harmeet Dillon is not Lynn Wood.
No, I didn't mean, I apologize. I hope I didn't really offend you, but I didn't mean that. I just meant that because now if if the future prospects of a lawyer are you have to be a liberal and you have to kind of not only be tolerant but be an adherent of the left, then those people that are willing to go to the right are going to be foregoing a lot of career opportunities, a lot of wealth opportunities, a lot of prestige, a lot of vanity, and you're going to get some lower tier people that are going to really reflect very poorly on it as an industry and academically.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, listen, there's also there's a whole sociological phenomenon. I remember people saying to me, I remember reading the comments when I filed the Gavin McInnes lawsuit. Oh man, this case is so meritless that I can't wait for the Rule 11 sanctions that are going to be awarded. Well, the judge in that case prevented it from being adjudicated so far for now 2 years by not ruling on it. But no Rule 11 motion was made, no Rule 11 letter was sent. But what happens is that the schoolyard bullying, and in other words, it's a kind of professional virtue signaling. I'm going to get out so far in front of, where everyone's going to want to be on this case. Is I'm going to accuse Ron Coleman of filing papers that would subject him to Rule 11 sanctions. That's defamatory. But the camp followers for Popat think nothing of it, nothing. And that's where we are now. It's good or bad, and it's not a matter of it's the left or the right. Even if you're in the center, you have to at least be prepared to not take on the work or to be silent in order to in order to withstand the kind of pressure you described when you were advertising on Rush Limbaugh's show.
I'm going to jump around a little bit because there's so many questions here and they're so interesting. So Will James says, number one, and this is a response, I think, to, was it Rising Serpent, who said, then how do we win elections? And so Will James, and thank you for watching on YouTube, because I'm thinking, I don't like YouTube that much. I like the intimacy of Periscope, but it is what it is. I want a backup, right? I want a spare tire. So not on my belly though. But so Will James says, number one, and this is in response to winning elections. Number one, before worrying about elections, build community, find others, talk to strangers, expand connections, tighten your community network, break the isolation wedge.
I wish I could find the tweet. I did a thread a couple of months ago about a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who I did not name, a very insightful money, Wall Street guy. And one of the things he was talking about was how the lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns, have destroyed the interpersonal human community that we had all gotten used to. Seeing people in the grocery store. When you see people in masks, you're not seeing people. You're seeing NPCs. You're seeing something less than people. But seeing people in the store and on the street and seeing the mailman and seeing the delivery boy, and besides the fact that we've destroyed so many of the retail businesses by an irrational fascistic government policy which favored big box stores over mom and pop retail stores with no scientific rationale whatsoever. Therefore, destroying many of these connections and community networks. But even in going to this big old store, to the supermarket and to the Best Buy, people are afraid to come out. People don't see each other in the restaurant, in the pizza shop. One of the advantages of the Orthodox Jewish way of life is that every morning I'm in synagogue, and I'm in synagogue again at night. And on Shabbos, on Friday night through Saturday, I spend a lot more time. And we have social events that we go to. And for all practical purposes, it seems fair to say that probably the strictly Orthodox or so-called ultra-Orthodox or Haredi community has probably achieved something like herd immunity. We were hit very, very hard a year ago, or March, April. That's when I got it, and when most of the people that we know got it. People died. There are still sick people. But that was when we got hit hardest, we got hit earliest, because we are very, very social. But the rest of America, which is already suffering from an alienation problem, suburbia, People didn't know their next door neighbors for years at a time. You would not know the people on your own block. It's worse than ever now. So Will James asked a fantastic question, but one of the great terrible things, and people like Gavin Newsom seem absolutely dedicated to maintaining this, that unless you're one of them, in which case you can do whatever you want, anywhere you want, with whomever you want, but unless you're one of them, or unless you're involved in a demonstration or event they approve of, you will not have community. You will not have strangers that you can talk to. You will not be able to expand connections. You will be isolated.
And there's an obligation amongst those people that are let out, right? We saw this during the Black Lives Matter protests, and I'm not talking about the subject of Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about kind of the getting unlocked out of your house element of it, that there was an obligation that if you were to get out of your house, you had to vote Democrat, you had to enlist other Biden voters, and you had to be another link within the self-reinforcing loop. So it's not just getting let out. It's also, you've got to be very vocal and very demanding and letting people know that where you stand and that you deserve to be out.
You're right. It's a great question, Will, but it's going to require a lot of rebuilding, and some of it is going to have to be rebuilt through technology, through these. So one of the things that's happening technologically, as you know, obviously, Adam, is that increasingly there's a move away from the centralized censorship, censorship vulnerable and monitoring vulnerable platforms towards individualized and decentralized and private communities. To the extent that they complain in the New York Times in a now notorious headline from about a week ago that people are joining Clubhouse and having unfettered conversations. What are we going to do about that? Unfettered conversations. This is America. This is the New York Times. New York Times versus Sullivan. You might have thought the New York Times invented the First Amendment.
Look at how I look at this. Is I see that part of the deliberate effect of the lockdown is I know people. I know a lot of Muslims. I know a lot of Muslims. I know a lot of immigrants. I mean, I'm just a lot of immigrants, more immigrants than I know people who are kind of indigenously born here and have a legacy lineage here. And almost all of them voted for Trump. But there's no way of, particularly within the Black community, I know a lot of people who voted for Trump. Within the Muslim community, a lot. And in fact, it was discussed today that a friend went into the library on that very day when they were doing when they were doing a transgender reading, a library reading. And, this is not a criticism of being a transgender, of course, right? Let people live, but just the intrusiveness of it, and particularly within a library setting. But if people aren't allowed to convene, then they're also not allowed to kind of compare notes on who they voted for. And that allows for a lot of election, let's not even call it irregularity so that we can avoid, being offensive to the Twitter algos, but a failure of investigation. Right. So Semple Pro 34, thank you again for being here. It's always so wonderful seeing you. Says Georgia State Senate subcommittee voted today to end at-will absentee, meaning those kind of, I guess, the drop-in ballots and everything. But it doesn't make a difference because, again, what I say is that you're now on an assembly line, and that news today arrived at your station. You're stamping it by telling me it's made an impression in you, and now it's leaving you, right? But the reality is the architecture and all the laws, all the behavioral architecture, all the legalistic legislative architecture has already been built. So now just reinstating it behaviorally and legislatively has already been conditioned, and there's already a high tolerance for it. So it is what it is. It's never going away, never, ever going away. It is now the American system of voting, and you're just going to you're going to see lapses of it, and you're going to see kind of an emotional kind of reprieve from it, but it's going to all come back raging. It just is what it is.
You may
Ron,
be
what
right. I think it's hard. It's very easy to see why you might be right. I do think never before has been more true that drawing smooth curves is a mistake. There are many surprises ahead, and they often don't come from where we think they're going to come from.
I'm very impressed with the Bitcoin people. Really impressed. I'm kind of stunned by, I did the investor series with Anthony Pompliano Pomp, then I did one with Milton. I'm probably going to do one with Hotep, right? Hotep Jesus. And, with some other people, because they really changed the world. And if they can do it and the GameStop people can do it, those are things that I have not considered. And I'm not bearish. Everybody knows I'm extremely bullish on I'm extremely bullish on America. I'm extremely bullish on our economy. So I'm not bearish in any way. But clearly, there's a transformation in our people operating system, and I do think that it can be restored somewhat by kind of what we saw in the success of the Bitcoin kids, by also having that same type of mass movement towards restoration of a constitutional framework.
Well, I think we agree. I think that's the future is in these sub-Rosa networks, among groups that have not yet been infiltrated, and the infiltration efforts are absolutely ongoing, no question about that, both at the private level in terms of these journalism, and organizations that are essentially arms of the state, as well as I'm sure the Democratic Party in the form of the FBI. The intelligence community of the Democratic Party and the Chinese Communist Party is making, I'm sure, efforts, and probably successful ones. Listen, I don't know who the hell's DMing me. Forget about crypto. All kinds of people sent me all kinds of information. When I was had a little bit of a public profile during the election litigation, my WhatsApp was insane with people sending me information. I don't know who the hell these people were. I don't know what side they were really on. It's just part of the fun.
Here's a very interesting question. I've thought about this a lot. So, Real Omar Sharif, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad that you picked that one up, because I was concerned we might not get to answer that one. Yeah, good. Go ahead.
No, I picked it up. Now you run with it, but I'll say the question so everyone has a chance to enjoy it with us. So, Real Omar Sharif, thank you so much for joining us. Says, Ron, how is Mark Elias able to do so much in 2019-20 without countermeasures from the right?
A couple of ways. One is that they have a plan for establishing control over the political institutions of this country, which the Republicans don't. No question about it. Republicans are playing defense. But also they have the judges. They bring their cases, most of the actions that they've taken have been with the aid of these attorneys general and and liberal chief executives, even in states like Pennsylvania, where the legislature itself is conservative. They're able to get results. If you want to challenge what's going on in voting in Philadelphia, you're going to have to file a case in Philadelphia. Well, the judges in Philadelphia, whether they're state court judges or federal judges, are going to be Democrat judges. And in Pennsylvania, they're not the least bit shy about being partisan, because there's no accountability. And like you said, they're showing us that they're in charge. Elias isn't any better than Harmeet and me and and Kurt Schlichter and the other people that are conservative lawyers, and he has the institutional support not only of the judiciary and important political organs, both locally and nationally, but also all these corporate law firms. And the Perkins Coie, right, is a money laundering operation for the Democratic National Committee and the Chinese Communist Party. And no one's going to, if Bill Barr wasn't going to crack that open, no one's going to crack that open, clearly. So they've got all this institutional support, and then you're left with, Ron and Harmeet in 10, 12 lawyer firms fighting against this. I mean, in the interior of the country, there are some more conservative law firms, but they're feeling the pressure, no question about that. So that happened with Jones Day. So they have, it's not, to some extent, it's a planning and a tactical advantage, but they're playing on the home field. It's good to have the home field advantage.
It is. I recall when George Soros was helping install a lot of those DAs because I was a part of it. I was funding it and I was very enthusiastic about it. And I was once on the assembly line myself and just stamping things and not considering once that product leaves me where it goes next. I have been fascinated by Mark Elias. And I've got to say, just looking at the comments, Real Omar Sharif's question was is very celebrated because people were really wondering how that happened and how there can be kind of a resistance against that's not a generational resistance that doesn't take 3 decades to build.
It's a real problem. It's a real problem. The institutional capture is a big problem, and I think the collapse of regulatory and law enforcement, including antitrust enforcement, has been key to all these things happening. On the one hand, you have Perkins Coie being used openly and notoriously as a partisan money laundering operation. And on the other hand, you have Donald Trump's lawyers having their files raided for incriminating information, and there's no outcry from the ACLU, no outcry from the bar associations, and the judge rubber stamps it, and there wasn't even any outcry from Trump. I was waiting for him to, he's supposed to be this big bloviator. I've never really heard him pounding the desk on this. So
let me ask you a question. And it's actually for Wizard Predicts also, because I believe, if I recall, and I usually recall these things pretty good, they have some law background themselves, right? Were you surprised after seeing Stone's lawyer, his office be raided? Were you surprised then next to see Michael Cohen's office be raided and that those same tactics applied?
Yeah, I was. But I won't be next time.
And what does that mean? You won't be next time? Because there will be a next time. Are you saying that you won't be surprised when it occurs?
I won't be surprised when it occurs. And I think that it's been normalized.
But once something has been normalized, at a certain point, it just doesn't become just kind of a Halley's Comet. And just something that happens with some frequency. It has to become almost the norm.
Well, it might and it might not. I mean, you were talking about the arcs of history and the way changes take place cumulatively, and there's sort of this. I mean, we generally know in the development of societies, right, that there's so little tendencies tend to ratchet and accumulate, so that you move from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy to symbolic monarchy to almost maybe to no monarchy at all. And it almost never works in the other direction. But that's only because we're looking at these huge sweeps of history. But if you look at the history of the French Revolution, right, from 1770s even through the 1830s, how many times the pendulum swung back and forth, and were actual decisions that were made by states and men in the moment, either military or political or cultural decisions were made, may have made a difference in the next turn of the pendulum. I think the overall trend is right, and my wife and I often ask ourselves, how is it possible to think that things can ever go back to the civic virtues that we thought we were enjoying even just a few years ago in this country? But you tend to forget that you can have swings that last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And in the arc of history, they will look like those will look like the Halley's Comets. But who knows what kind of daylight can get into the room during that time? I mean, historians don't know whether, they don't know. Historians either think Napoleon was the worst thing ever, or he was the best thing ever. But between the anarchy of the French Revolution and the establishment of the Fourth Republic, there were lots of variations. And I think it's a mistake it's almost, if you don't mind my saying so, Marxian to assume that there are these forces of history that are ineluctable and which cannot be constrained. Trump changed history. And you might well argue, and I hear it coming, he's proof that you can't change the direction that we're going in. But I think a lot of people lost a lot of sleep for 4 years.
Well, so it's interesting, and Tim Heidegger, thank you so much. And I like the picture that you've now put on your YouTube. So that's pretty awesome. Says, to the rising serpent question about future elections, I believe in generational history theory, fourth turning, and our cohorts will solve the problems in 20-year time frame. And my thought about that is, let's assume you're correct, okay? And but will they be solving? What will they be restoring in 20 years' time? Will they be restoring where we are next year?
Let's, for reference, look at the Reagan era. When Reagan was in office, it seemed like it was an incredible revanchist exercise taking place, that we were really turning back the clock. We were going to shrink the size of government. We were going to reduce tax rates, and we were going to put God back in the... And what he did was slow things down. He slowed down the growth of government. It continued to grow. He increased the number of immigrants and radically changed and liberalized immigration law. He slowed things down. So when you're living in it, it feels as if you're making progress. It's very, very hard. The conservative enterprise is hard because once you admit of democracy as a legitimate part of your political system, which we do, you are building a dike against water. And of course, even if you don't, you're building a dike against water, right? No matter what the government system is, a minority is always ruling a majority. And the majority wants more of what the minority has, inevitably. There are fewer and fewer constitutional and institutional and cultural walls or obstacles to the water pressure that's building for the majority to take what it wants and just take it. One of them is, though, ironically, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, the elite that is in control of the wealth and intends to maintain control of the wealth, it is to their great benefit to maintain the existing forms of elite progress, throwing bones to the likes of BLM and radical chic organizations and the shakedown artists and the Antifa. That's fine. They're not really having a true effect on wealth distribution, although they're having a massive effect on governance. You look what's happening in the failed cities, especially in Seattle and the like. But I'm running out of voice.
No, we're gonna go on because there's a lot of questions here, and now we're gonna start ripping through them. So this is a very important one, and I was actually two things in response to your last point. I was actually watching Will Chamberlain's Periscope today, where he had, I think, one of his new staffers from Human Events, who was discussing kind of how Poland and some other countries are trying to withstand pressure from the left and retain some Aristotelian and some Western cultural
and some Christian.
Yeah, of course, and some Christian. And I've always thought that the prosecution, particularly recently against Russia, was to further destroy that.
Great point.
Yeah.
Central and Eastern Europe are the last repositories of what we would identify as Western civilization in the world. the so-called West, Europe and the United States, are not. Whatever it is we have here, it's some kind of Americanized, postmodern.
So we're going to go on just a tiny bit, right? Because I said there was two parts to it, right? I said the next. So Reed Troutman, thank you so much for joining us, and I really like that picture that you've chosen. Is there and let's keep the question, our responses to a kind of conceptual framework type of thing, where we're taking a look at the bloody knife and not the unfortunate bloody person. So Reed Troutman asks, is there still a way to uncover the fraud, bloody knife, through court action?
Yes.
Oh, no, you can answer that. No, I mean, go with that.
Well, there is, because there's so much evidence. The knife is bloody, and it has DNA on it, it has fingerprints on it. And so much that was destroyed in violation of the law, that if there is anything like a legitimate legal process, and you say, is there still a way? Did I say, would it happen? Yes. Is there still a way? There are many judges, both liberal and conservative, both appointed by Republicans and Democrats, who believe in doing things right in their courtroom. I know it's hard to believe after some of the things we've seen, but who will do their jobs. And given the evidentiary record that exists, it's going to require the Supreme Court to do something right. But, sometimes they do.
But I don't know if they're going to be able to do their jobs. And I go back to the question that Wizard predicts, or to what they posited, which is about how the environment within law, professional environment, and kind of academic environment is changing.
There's a judicial culture that has gotten extremely woke also. There's no question about it. The judges look over their shoulders at each other, and that's a problem. But I do think, and I'm reluctant to weigh in on Chief Justice Roberts. I don't think that's his issue. I think his issue is something else. I think he has failed magnificently in the last year, but I don't think it's because he wants to be respected. I don't think it's that at all. I think that people who think that don't appreciate that these members of the Supreme Court think of themselves as above it all. They don't. I don't think that they are the most powerful people in America.
Oh, certainly. And
there's
no restriction of them whatsoever.
Right. And they don't see themselves as needing approval from anyone else. They live a rather sheltered existence anyway. There's no promotion available for them. So I think that they're comfortable being who they are and what they want to be. And I don't.
But so my question
is making history, because I think very few of them study history.
But so is my question. I agree, and I don't think in the future there's going to be any historians. I've discussed that a lot. That's why I want it to be me, because I feel like I'm going to be the last one telling of this revolution. Thucydides talked about the first revolution. I'm going to probably talk about the last one. But so going back to what Wizard Predicts was saying, there's a real, and I've observed this, there's a real demoralizing effect. I mean, just what we saw with the National Guard in Washington, D.C., we're also seeing now within the legal community, by not being allowed to have representation of Trump or Kyle Rittenhouse, is the exact same type of demoralization we saw from the National Guard. When I looked at that and I saw those people sleeping there, I did not think of them protecting. I thought that they were being humiliated.
Well, but think of the police over the summer retreating from sticks and stones and rocks. And I kept thinking, well, the unions are gonna say that enough's enough. We're not going to continue, and they didn't.
So because now I got a little tongue twisted, right? So Semple Plevro 34 again. Thank you. I've got to get used to saying that now, right? I should write it down. So Matt made it sound, and this is Matt, I think Brainard, who was just interviewed by our good friend Jack Murphy, and I'm a big fan of Jack, and hopefully he's doing a lot more with Lemon Lawyer. We were discussing that today, actually. So Matt Brainard made it sound like his data testimony was blocked by Trump's law team.
I don't know. I wasn't there.
And Dr. Zexi, thank you so much for joining us. And I see that you're now, I don't think you were using that picture yesterday on YouTube. So thank you. That's awesome that you've chosen that picture. And Dr. Sexy says, as Loomer showed from the Women's March, white supremacy is a code word for Jewish people too. How dangerous is this blind spot from the left?
It's an existential danger. It's not right-wing anti-Semitism, but left-wing anti-Semitism, because it is shared by assimilated Jews who are in positions of great power in this country, and especially in the Democratic Party. They're embarrassed by Israel, and they're embarrassed by Orthodox Jews, and they're a big problem. It's a big problem, but
what is the is there going to be a coordinated response, or what type of resources and capacity does the Jewish communities have to respond? Because I do think that a lot of this, I see a lot of anti-Semitism coming from the left.
Well, most of it is rather abstract. It doesn't really have much of an effect on our lives. It had an effect on our lives in New York, because the governor and the mayor of the city of New York made it official policy, and they were not called out on it by the likes of the so-called Anti-Defamation League, which is a fraud in its national office, or by the ACLU, or by any of the Jewish organizations. They focus on Donald Trump. The answer is that we do what we have to do and what we can do, but ultimately, our trust comes from God. Our trust is in God. God is the only guarantee that we have of our continued survival. And if at any time he decides that it's not going to work out for us in a certain place, God forbid, then no one can stop it from going that way.
Ready to go on. Thank you. And that was awesome, Ron. And then one of the next books I'm reading, actually, I meant to read it before, but was Jews in Ancient Rome, and it covers the period from Tiberius onward. I'll lend it to you when I'm done with it. It's an out of print book that unfortunately my mentor who left his body, I took from him. So Fight Back New York City. Interesting question. I think I posed it to Alexander once as well. Says, why did Sidney Powell, and I want to be generous in the language. This is not the language I would use. But Fight Back New York City, Fight Back NYC said, why did Sidney Powell commit career suicide?
We are really, I will say this. I think there were these very interesting articles that came out a couple of weeks ago. One by Byrne, by Patrick Byrne, and one that was not a firsthand report, but it was printed in Axios, I think, but that sounded like it was probably the source sounded like. First, I thought it was Eric Hirschman, but someone else told me that it was more likely that it was Pat Cipollone. They were consistent. These two stories were entirely consistent. That basically she was really prepared to really put it all on the line. And somebody pointed out in a chat that we had, a private chat, this was somebody who was the president of the American College of Appellate Attorneys. More prestigious you don't get. Her reputation, but she'd gotten very close to General Flynn. There's a lot about the General Flynn situation that leaves a lot of us puzzled still. I don't know Sidney. I don't, I think at the end of the term, the last few weeks of the term, the president seemed to lose his interest in fighting. On the legal front, he wasn't able to decide whose advice to take. The role of Rudy Giuliani in all this is hard for me to understand. One of the president's big problems was a reliance on cronies. I think that played itself out right to the very end.
So I got two questions for you about that, right? And I'm going to go back to the Sidney Powell one, so because I see it there. But before I do that, when you said Giuliani, you don't really understand, what Giuliani's involvement there was. It Trump did have. I don't think Trump was going to win regardless, but it did seem his tactics were. He seemed very disoriented. His responses seemed very kind of disoriented, and I know that they were hitting him with 100 punches in 100 different spots. But what was Giuliani's role from just kind of your legal observation of it?
So forget about legal observation. I'll tell you as a practical matter. What I realized very early on was that the legal, and I'm not saying it from a legal point of view, but from an organizational point of view, it was the structure of the campaign and the Republican, the two different bodies. Legal efforts were terribly disorganized. There was no centralized coordination. There was no centralized repository of information or authority. You had the campaign, the Trump campaign on the one hand. You had the RNC, which had its own system, which is the regular Republican organizations in the various states. And then you had Rudy kind of operating out of the White House, independent of the campaign, as a sort of personal attorney. And at different times, I was representing the campaign. I was representing the Republican National Committee, and probably at one point even representing the president himself. It was not the model of good execution. And despite everything I said and all the excuses I made about the home team advantage and the institutional advantage and all these things, anyone could have told you that this was going to be necessary. Anyone.
Yeah, Will Chamberlain made the same point. Will Chamberlain said from the very beginning, from the second he found that videotape, remember he did that video of like some election shenanigans in Philadelphia? As soon as he did that video, I think he said hours later that he was already disappointed that there wasn't kind of real prosecution of that video. And he was saying day by day, he was saying this case is outside of litigation now. It's just a cluster, and they're holding on to straws.
That's right. There was no strategy. It was all tactics.
Okay, so we're going to go back onto. So why did Sidney Powell now kind of sequentially? Why did Sidney Powell, just from your observation of it and the fact that there was no central repository, she committed career suicide?
She sincerely believed that she could save the day. She saw a path to doing so. She may have drunk a little bit too deeply of certain Kool-Aid. Well, I don't know if it was Kool-Aid, but
a Quaalude.
I wouldn't say that. But she was also in a situation of extraordinary pressure, being treated with a great deal of disrespect from the career White House counsel people who, frankly, seemed to very much be representing institutions that were.
But they made a huge mistake, and there's a lot of questions here, and everyone's going to get tired, so we're going to rip through them. But you were so right when you said there was no central repository, because I and a lot of other people here are really wanted something to hold on to, right? We didn't really want the cases in Georgia, which was that young person, Neil, whatever his name is, very nice, younger person, but it was a little bit of a flimsy kind of case. We didn't really want the Sidney Powell stuff because we recognized the complications of the Dominion type of intrigues, right? There's too much intrigue there. We're not going to be able to get to the bottom of all that software algorithmic intrigue and everything else. We all just really wanted something like a repository that kind of was pristine, kind of a WikiLeaks type of pristine quality to it, where we could all just hold on to something and say, this is proof. And instead, what was happening is people were out there grasping for straws, and there was only one real straw in it, and the thousands of other straws that were attained were just kind of Sidney Powell-ish.
Well, let's separate two things, though. There was not a central repository of information, and I mean for purposes of internal. There was also nothing like a central repository of communications. And I don't want to go into it beyond that, because I was involved in some discussions that I had hoped would improve that and didn't. So, you know, I don't want to compromise Harmeet Dillon in the house cleaning that she's hoping to do in the near future. It's a problem.
But there was no, forget about the internal repository, right? There was no external one. There was a place that kind of took all of the interesting samples that were out there and kind of put them on a website, but they went through no type of authoritative type of screening where people could say, this is the good one, this is not the good one. I spent days looking through that Neil one, whatever that was, the one that was in that the young kid filed in Georgia.
Yeah.
And then I showed it to somebody who's an absolute like expert in New York that I deal with in constitutional law, because they were like, this is a cracker pot type of thing. They said, you should not be holding on to this. They told me to get rid of everything I had. So it made it very difficult for me, because there were sites that had all this election type of stuff, but I don't know which ones are the good ones, right? Okay, so we're going to go on. So Wizard Predicts says, we need to take the law schools back. Okay.
We're not going to take any of the schools back. I mean, academia is completely lost. The only way that, and it's lost, and it has too much money to care about being lost. So it's only going to matter. The only way around it is that people are going to continue to succeed without college. Law schools, forget about it. I mean, they're so a part of this system. And not only that, they're for sale. They're literally for sale. I mean, if you'll give you have a law school like the one I went to, Northwestern, which is a 100-plus-year-old law school, maybe 150 years old. And along came the Pritzker family and gave them a check, and they changed their name to the Pritzker School of Law. How do you do that with an institution that was not about to close its doors because of bankruptcy, that William Jennings Bryan graduated from? It's just unbelievable to me. How do you just sell a law school? So it's academia is a racket. It's all about money, and it's all about perpetuation of the elites.
And so we've got a lot of questions here, and then we're going to rip through because it's getting late, right? So Robert Barnes, and I'm a big fan of Robert, actually. Robert's great. I watch a lot of his stuff that he does with Viva Frei because he's been really helpful to me. I thought he was wrong with his predictions on the outcomes of the election, but I also understood that he looked at it much more from a gambler on what should be bet upon and odds. So when I looked at it as he was representing the gambler's interest, he was spot on. He was like, buy it this, sell it that. But I thought that in the end, Trump never had a chance. But he was picking them right in terms of what to buy and when to sell it, right? So Ben John 34, you changed your very funny. He changed his name, so thank you very much. Says because that was you recognize the picture, right? So it says Robert Barnes says Sidney Powell was out of her element with election litigation.
Well, yes, it's true. But on the other hand, the election litigation cadre had run for the hills. I mean, there were specific election law practices that had been engaged to represent the president, and they folded like cheap card tables when people started, throwing the names of the lawyers involved up on Twitter and calling them up, threatening to remove their business from the firm. So anybody who could do it had to do it. And now, at one point, Harmeet and or Harmeet was asked to do it because she is an experienced election litigator, but it was so, things were so far gone at that point that, we discussed it and decided it wasn't worth it. No good could come of it.
So, and we're gonna get to the close very soon. So, Real Omar Sharif says again, won't challenge. And let me respond to the first part of this with my expectations of this, because I feel that I'm probably the top authority in the world, and my only proof of that is that I keep my mouth shut, right? So, Real Omar Sharif, and so did Socrates. I told you I'm reading a lot of philosophy, and he said in his apology somewhere that he kept his mouth shut for a long time because he wanted to stay alive, essentially. So Real Omar Sharif said, won't challenges to COVID vaccines be dismissed by the courts the same way as the election? I'll tell you what my expectations are, is pharma spends over $4 billion a year on social media, right? And they spend, in terms of advertising, and then they spend billions of dollars more on Facebook in doctor-patient groups, patient advocacy groups, doctor groups. So on additional to that, they're not going, just as Wizard Predicts and Ron were discussing kind of this legal infiltration by I suppose it's by the left. I don't know. You guys have a lot more theory on that, I'm sure. But let me just say by the left, to abbreviate it. I think that pharma has infiltrated everything. I mean, they just gave Fauci $1 million. He's a public servant. And like Ron was saying, and Lee Smith was saying, and Conservative Treehouse was saying, they want us to know. I mean, if that $1 million was like a slap in the face, so that really gives me some type of a leading indicator of what happens next from the courts.
I don't know, when we say challenges to COVID vaccines, that's not a legal issue. What you mean, presumably, is challenges to laws requiring COVID vaccines. I'm not aware of any such law. So how could I answer a question about a statute that hasn't even been enacted? I don't know. I know it's kind of old school and linear of me to answer that way, but I don't know what the law is.
And Lex Usi, and then I think it might be our last. I see one other, so we're probably going to go with that because it's about Robert Barnes, who I'm in admiration of, because he's been really helpful. I'm very selective about what information I let into my brain, because once it's in your mind, it's very difficult to extract it, right? So I'm very cautious, and he did some very good stuff. Him and Will were actually some of the few people that said, look, this thing isn't going to end the way you want it to. The litigation is horrible. It's a cluster. Just, we tried, guys. So Lex Usi says, Dennis Wingo said schools are failing to educate. We did an investor series number 11, and we were discussing Space Force and how I want our youth to be more participating in it, and particularly our disadvantaged youth, how we can give them kind of a career and a life path, and how we're not manufacturing the type of talent we need. And he, we're discussing Space Force and the sciences and STEM, and he said that our school system is a miserable failure. It's a miserable failure.
I mean, no one could really seriously dispute that.
I'm going to continue going on it because then I'm looking for the close here, right? So just give me a moment. So Chump 240.
Just chumping a bunch of numbers. You don't have to say all the numbers. Come on, there's only one chump here.
There's two, because I include myself within that. So I'm Chump 1 and you're Chump 2 then. So why are we funding the Wuhan lab through 2024? I'm not going to be responsive to that with any precision. I'll give you directional response. There's nothing wrong with us funding them because they do have very vicious wet markets out there. They're, bats, wet markets. If a Westerner has never seen them, I've seen them before. I don't know, Ron, if you've ever seen them. But they're a real problem. And zoonotic transmission of these diseases and viruses is a real huge problem throughout the world. And China does have a lot of bats, and there's a lot of mutations of these viruses. So there does need to be a lot of investigation. I can discuss the lab in detail because I've done a lot of investigation on it, and I've actually worked with several of our congressmen about it with their staff. But I can tell you that there's nothing wrong with us funding it. The best leading indicator I can give you of what to expect on terms of the legislative, judicial outcome, and everything else within the United States is that there's been no prosecution of the violations from the World Health Organization, none whatsoever, that they failed to comply with the international health regulations of 2005, nor of Chinese Communist Party. So I think that's the leading indication of what you can expect from our court systems. Here we might close on this because I kind of like this comment because it's very in sympathy with Ron's belief is that you've got to keep on wounding. You've got to keep on your attempts to slay the giant can also be in paper cuts, and enough paper cuts can inflict the damage needed.
It's possible. Meanwhile, it's what I got. It's what I got.
Yeah, you're great, and we discussed it a long time ago, and I definitely appreciate it. So I think we're going to close out. I think I'm going to keep that comment on that because I like that that's a way to close. And just so everyone knows, I'm very optimistic. People should not confuse, these things that I say, the transformation of our people operating system and how, the distribution of wealth. It's why I tell everyone they've got to invest. I'm very adamant about it. Markets are going to double and triple from here. Ron, when we were on our private call, I told you the same thing, right? You've got to invest. It's the only way, if we know what the future looks like, and I think all of us have a good sense of it, we have a moral obligation not to suffer it, right? And I'm very, very bullish, but your kids have to get a good education. And if that doesn't always necessarily mean a book education, it just means in terms of literacy and the ability to communicate and express themselves. Because we're living in such a fragmented world, these kids today don't know how to communicate within each other and the agreement on words.
And also analytical ability. They have to be able to, the kind of things the arguments you see people make, they can't be. We know they're Trump supporters because they're wearing Trump hats. People say that with a straight face in public. We know they're Trump supporters because they have Trump hats on. I mean, analytical, just comment, math teaches you these things. Geometry teaches you these things. You don't have to master integral calculus, or much less, chemistry or physics. But you need to know that 1 and 1 can only equal 2, and 2 can only equal 4. There's nothing white or European or cis normative about that. That's just the fact, Jack.
Oh, I like the picture that they chose. So Saniq Lee. And I speak several languages fairly fluently, but I pronounce all of them horribly. So it has an image of Tommy, so that's pretty cool. So thank you very much. And I think we're going to close up.
It's been a long haul here, man. I think I got overtime for this.
You don't. These are not billable hours. These are not billable hours for you. So we're going to close up, and I really want to thank everybody. I thought this was a lot of fun. I was expecting like an hour and a half, and there were just such good questions and such good comments. And I wanted it to drift. I knew where I wanted it to begin with, but I knew I wanted it to drift. Ron, you're awesome.
I don't know about awesome, but I try my best to keep up my end of a conversation.
You do, and you're awesome, and we're friends on and offline. And now you're transferring a lot of your life to YouTube, which I think is smart.
No, my life is actually very much in the here and now. As you know, I go completely off the grid Friday night through Saturday night as a Sabbath observer. That's real life. But in terms of my social media presence and my ability to market my services and my manifold talents, yes, I'm going more toward video because Twitter is killing itself. And plus also the camera loves me.
It does. I will say I'm also doing a little bit of kind of a crossing the chasm over to YouTube. And I'm doing it very reluctantly because I love the intimacy of Periscope. I truly do. I love the intimacy. I love the engagement. I love the way it kind of feels. I love the way it's on a feed. However, I will say that Twitter is changing. There's just the fun of Twitter is definitely changing, and the people's ability to kind of freely exchange information. There's so much kind of self censorship that's going on right now, and I can see it. That people are afraid to share even good articles. Somebody here asked about, did I see the article about Q? And Ron, did you see it? about Q from a game designer's perspective? Did everybody here see that article?
Vaguely, I didn't read it, but I saw some reference to it. Yeah.
And you saw that comment, right? And I apologize I didn't put the comment up there. That was a brilliant article. And when it was about the design of Q, kind of the game player as a game of Q. And do you know that just by sharing that, I was very aware of risking being hit by the algorithms of Twitter, and I was very conscious of it.
I'm very bad at that. But I do have that spidey sense you talk about of when I do put text together, knowing what lines to stay inside usually.
Everybody, thank you so much. We went 2 hours and 20 minutes. I think you hit the record, Ron. You might have done.
I am a man of not too many, of many words. Good night.
And you're going to stay with me. I'm going to press the button. You're going to stay with me for 1 more minute.
Yeah, we'll debrief.
Yeah, we will. And I want to thank everybody. And I see Rick Wall. Rick Wall is here, and they say Q as a game design is brilliant. Give it a read. It's a brilliant article. I agree. It was very informative to me. So people want to Google that. Nancy has joined here. She hasn't made my chocolate ice cream yet, probably though. So yeah, can you make it now? Yeah. So I'm going to press the button. We're all going to go away, except for Ron and me. So I want to thank everybody again for allowing us onto your feed. That was pretty awesome. I had a good time.
Good night.
Now I press the button.